Mark Rogers TV on college football. And for those of you who wrote off the Big Ten last week in week 2 of college football, well, the league was not dead. It's technically dead now. Anybody who could possibly support the Big Ten and its football play on the field this season was going to give it possibly one more chance in week 3 with these matchups that we saw today. Not the marquee matchups of week 2, Michigan, Notre Dame, Ohio State, Virginia Tech, Michigan State, Oregon, of course, and the week before with Wisconsin taking on LSU. But if you want to talk about the depth of any conference, if you want to talk about the entirety of the conference, you'd have to give the Big Ten at least one more week here in week 3. Officially dead, bad, given a number of chances, and unless we see some ridiculously remarkable turnaround in postseason play, this is going to stick with the Big Ten until next season, and maybe beyond that. I really think that Ohio State's loss in the national championship game against Florida in 2006 did irreparable damage to the Big Ten, at least irreparable unless there's a national championship awaiting the Big Ten at some point, and it's not going to happen this season. They won't get the chance to play in a national championship game, and they can blame themselves, even though the system is flawed and every conference should be represented. The Big Ten can only blame itself. Let's run down what happened today because it was embarrassing for this conference. I point out the biggest culprit, I believe, because I think it was the most capable or perceived to be the most capable opponent playing a Power 5 conference schedule or team today. That's Iowa. Iowa led Iowa State 14-3. They blew the second half lead. They blew the ball game. They lost at home to Iowa State. Iowa State will probably, now we have to see the Big 12 play out, but Iowa State is most likely. They were last year and most likely again this year the second worst team in the Big 12. We don't know that. And they played a really good game the week before at home against Kansas State and should have won the game, took it to the wire before losing to Kansas State at the wire. Kansas State, a team that is currently 19th in the country. So Iowa State might be decent, but still. Iowa's the big brother. Iowa beats Iowa State most of the time. Iowa should beat Iowa State. Iowa is projected to be about the 5th or 6th best team in the Big Ten. Iowa State more like the next to last place team in the Big 12. And again, we're going to have to see it play out. But that's what it looks like right now. And Iowa lost a game that wasn't even on the radar when talking about Big Ten non-conference opponents, because it was somewhat taken for granted that Iowa would beat Iowa State and that Iowa could possibly sneak into some kind of periphery contention for a national championship. And I understand that Iowa should not be talked about in those terms, but follow me here. A favorite, most likely in its first 10 games before playing Nebraska and Wisconsin. Iowa loses to Iowa State. Bad loss. Minnesota loses to TCU. Not a bad loss on the surface. TCU about mid-rung Big 12. Minnesota about mid-rung Big 10. But being a 16-point underdog on the road, and that not being enough. Minnesota losing 30-7 to TCU. That makes it a bad loss. Again, Minnesota went 8-4. Let's strip away the window dressing. 8-4 last year, but 4-4 in the Big Ten. They were an average, at best, Big Ten team last year. They had a cushy schedule within the conference, even. But they go to TCU and they get flattened 30-7. TCU has not been able to find an offense in recent years, but they found one against Minnesota, 30-7, 7 points. I know TCU's got a formidable defense, but Minnesota can't throw the ball. It's pathetic. 30-7. Maryland. Maryland actually determined and found out today that it's a member of the Big Ten. How did it find out? Well, it was good enough to beat West Virginia, another Big 12, Big Ten matchup. The Big Ten had an opportunity to sweep, or at least win 2 out of 3. I was expecting 2 out of 3, or I knew this one would be a toss-up, but I was expecting Iowa to win. So Maryland, West Virginia, Terps win it last year 37-0. Not so this year. They get ripped up by Clint Trickett. And West Virginia again, let's see it play out. West Virginia might be pretty good. They played really well against Alabama, losing 33-23. That was a game until about 5 minutes left in the game. So West Virginia might be pretty good. But again, Maryland representing the Big Ten now. They lived up to the billing, and they lived up to the conference moniker in recent times in losing at the last second against West Virginia. Who else? Indiana. Indiana, we never expect anything out of Indiana. But Indiana, Purdue, Illinois, those teams should beat the MAC teams. And even when they're really bad, as they've been over the last several years, do beat the MAC teams, but no longer. They don't even beat the MAC teams anymore. Indiana loses to Bowling Green in the last few seconds. Another blow to the Big Ten. Not nationally, not to those people that just look at the big games, but to the people I'm talking to right now, you, the smart fan, the fan that wants some serious analysis, another crushing blow to the Big Ten and losing to a MAC team in the last few seconds. Illinois, they went to Washington. That was one that I wrote off actually in my college football predictions this week. That was one of my confidence picks, taking Washington minus 13.5 to cover easily against Illinois. And as expected, the Fighting Illini had no fight in Seattle today, 44-19. Who else? Purdue loses to Notre Dame. They actually played pretty well, but that one was a lost cause. Purdue not expected to beat Notre Dame. Purdue might be the worst Power 5 conference team. Didn't think I would be saying this 5 years ago, but the worst Power 5 conference team in America. It's always been Duke. It was Cal last year, possibly. Maybe it was Purdue last year. Kansas. It's Purdue. It's probably Purdue in Power 5 football. Nebraska right now is just crushing Fresno State, 41-12. Wow. Everybody's crushing Fresno State. USC took them out, 52-13. Utah hung 59 on them, so Nebraska getting the win, doing what it should do, and maybe that's the last teeny hope for the Big Ten to salvage some kind of respect. Nebraska takes on Miami next week. I expect that to be a toss-up game. Again, Miami, Nebraska at Lincoln. I'll have some marginal interest in that one. And Nebraska, if they run the table, they'll be given no respect at this point. Michigan State is the one team in this conference that has some level of respect based on the way they played last year, based on the way that they won the Rose Bowl. The way they took out Ohio State. Ohio State still has elite talent. They haven't put it together, but Michigan State knocked them out, then won the Rose Bowl over Stanford, and the way Michigan State played for almost 3 quarters against Oregon. Respectable team, top 15 legit team, but they have no shot to get to the college football playoffs because of the way the rest of the conference has looked. Michigan wins in blowout fashion, but again, was it really blowout fashion over Miami? It was 10-10 late in the second quarter. Ohio State wins 66-0. That means nothing. Rutgers and Penn State played a Big Ten game, the first of the Big Ten season, and Penn State wins it late. And that was that was the great news for the Big Ten this week, was that Penn State actually, the postseason ban lifted, and they have a chance to play for a division championship, go to the Big Ten championship game, and on from there. But again, Penn State's not good enough to win even the Big Ten with Michigan State, Ohio State, and others on its schedule. But it's a good story, and hey, it could happen. It's reality that they do control their own destiny. Nebraska, Wisconsin, you would expect them to be the Western Division representatives, but again, no games played yet in the Big Ten aside from Penn State and Rutgers. Northwestern's been atrocious as of late after going 4-0 early last season, coming down the stretch, but losing those games in the Big Ten, so you can't knock the Big Ten for beating itself. But then Northwestern comes into this season and they lose against Cal and they lose against Northern Illinois, and that's another layer to this, is the Big Ten not just losing Power 5 matchups, which, if I did the math correctly, 1-10 against the Power 5. I would say that the only respectable losses in that is Purdue, of course, is going to lose to Notre Dame. And Wisconsin played well against LSU. LSU's legit. They've got great talent. And Wisconsin played well, had a 17-point lead. And that kind of started the tumble because before that, the Big Ten came out the first week, did what it needed to do, didn't beat anybody really good, got the one Power 5 conference win with Rutgers going to Washington State. We've seen in recent weeks what that means. Hasn't meant a whole lot with Washington State collapsing against Nevada. But at the same time, Wisconsin comes out, they play well, and that started the tumble. They blow the big game against LSU, and it has just unraveled since then. This conference will not gain any respect back until they win some postseason games now, because that's it. It's Miami, Nebraska, it's Pitt, Iowa. That's not going to shake anybody up and make anybody change their minds about the Big Ten. This was another atrocious showing by this conference, and it may cost Michigan State, who's actually legitimately a good team. It will probably cost them a shot at getting to the college football playoffs. For Ohio State, they're not there right now. They have the talent. They'll be back. They will be an elite program. They are an elite program, but they'll be an elite team in the next couple of years. I have little doubt about that, but they're just not very good this year. They're a top 25 team, and we'll see where they land in a bowl game and where they play. Wisconsin's a decent team as well. The Big Ten has 4 top 25 teams. I still think Nebraska, especially Wisconsin, Michigan State, and Ohio State, are top 25 teams legitimately, not just based on the record that they'll build up within the Big Ten, but they are 4 of the top 25 teams in the country. But the Big Ten has just blown it. And there are serious issues in this conference. I have felt in the past that the national media, unlike feedback given to the ACC and criticism and analysis of the Big 12, those two conferences at times have, especially the ACC, and before that when it was the BCS situation, the Big East, those two conferences were horrible certain years. The ACC went through a 3-13 run in BCS bowl games, and even those were give-me wins against the likes of Cincinnati and teams like that. And the ACC was never criticized. Now, the Big Ten has played itself up and has lived up to it in the past, but in the last several years as a challenger to the SEC, and that's one of the reasons why the Big Ten takes the criticism and the heat. It has the huge, enormous, prestigious programs in Ohio State, Michigan, Michigan State, well, to a lesser extent, Michigan State, Penn State, Nebraska, and this conference is expected to play elite football, but no more. They're going to have to build it brick by brick, and it's going to take hard work. And right now, the recruiting rankings say that Urban Meyer's capable of building that foundation. The play on the field says that Mark D'Antonio is capable, and to a lesser extent, Gary Anderson, based on his predecessor's work. And Brady Hoke has recruited well, but he's not developing talent. Michigan's a mess, and he may be out if he doesn't probably go 9-3 this season and really needs to beat somebody decent. So that's a harsh take on the Big Ten, but it's well-deserved. 1-10, Power 5 conference record, if I've got my numbers straight. Love to hear from you whether the Big Ten bashing is a little too heavy or maybe not heavy enough. We'll see what the conference has in postseason play, and we will do some more conference analysis. I think this is intriguing when you really look at the matchups and not just the record, but you have to look at the matchups and who they play against. Again, for example, Purdue cannot be expected as the worst team in the Big Ten to beat Notre Dame, so that's a loss, but at the same time, that's not Iowa losing to Iowa State. That should not happen. Let's talk the Big Ten right here on Mark Rogers TV.